本期视频是大卫·戈德曼近日在美国昆西研究所一场研讨会上发言的节选。大卫·戈德曼是美国著名经济战略家和作家，亚洲时报副主编。他是香港云峰金融的合伙人，后来这家投资银行被马云收购。他在发言中表达了对美国放弃制造业、高度依赖从中国进口的担忧，呼吁美国在中国人不擅长的未知领域鼓励创新。我们看看他是怎么说的吧。
David, you wrote a book in 2019 entitled You Will Be Assimilated, China's Plan to Sino-Form the World. You say they want to have everybody in the world pay rent to the Chinese empire. You said in an interview when your book came out, they want to control the key technologies, the finance, the logistics, and make everyone dependent on them. Basically make everyone else a tenant farmer. America is on track to become poor, dependent, and vulnerable unless we revive the American genius for innovation. What do you think about what Sagar just said, the problems that he invoked, and do you still believe that way? You wrote the book before some major events in the world, COVID, the wars abroad.
Kelly, the biggest single economic fact in the world is a globally aging population and a rapidly aging population in the industrial world. And it will be rapidly aging in India, Latin America, and elsewhere. The scarcest resource in the world is young people who can read a manual and get trained and work in a factory. China 15 years ago, looking at its own demographics, determined that it wanted to essentially annex the young people of the global south, particularly in Asia, Latin America, where you have a reasonably disciplined workforce and the ability to introduce infrastructure and make them part of the Chinese economy. They've accomplished that. They did that first by using digital broadband infrastructure as the thin end of the wedge. That's Huawei and ZTE, which are the dominant players in telecom infrastructure, particularly in the global south. They did that through the Belt and Road Initiative, which built a lot of physical infrastructure. There have been many failures in that project, and the American press tends to play up the failure, debt trap, diplomacy, cathedrals in the desert, and so forth. But during the past 10 years, there's been virtually no change in Chinese exports to developed markets, US, Japan, Europe, Australia. But in the last 5 years, their exports to the global south have doubled. And that's an astonishingly big achievement. Now, a lot of the exports that they do to the global south are re-exported to the US. We put tariffs on Chinese goods, but Chinese build plants in Indonesia, Vietnam, Mexico, and so forth, sell components and capital goods to these countries, and we buy from them. So despite the best efforts of Donald Trump, who is completely sincere in his concern about this, we are more dependent on Chinese imports and more globalized now than ever before. And the key to this, the key to solving this is rebuilding American industry, seizing the heights, getting the high tech. But that's exactly what the Chinese set out to do. You look at their subsidies, they're very targeted. First, they got solar panels. Secondly, electric vehicles, where they're certainly the dominant player right now. They're working on low-end semiconductors, and they'll use that as a springboard for high-end semiconductors. And the Chinese have probably, and of course telecom infrastructure, the Chinese have done more in terms of applications of AI to manufacturing than we did. One of the insane things about destroying a manufacturing base is if you don't have it, you can't innovate with it because you don't have the people to do the innovation. So I think the key to all of this is a domestic industrial policy. I don't mean necessarily handing out checks to every industry that knocks on the door. That's just rent seeking. But a policy that trains workers, trains engineers, makes capital available to private investors who are willing to take risks on goods production, and aggressively seeks to innovate our way out of this mess. There's a lot to be said about that. I wrote a little book about that for Claremont, which is available on their website free. But at this point, we can't, we tried to slam the door on some Chinese exports that just came in the window, as I mentioned, through third countries. And that puts us definitely on a back foot. And the solution is to give American workers the tools and the skills to return to the kind of golden age of working class incomes that we had in the 50s and 60s. There's an old joke about the Austro-Hungarian Empire that it was a tyranny tempered by incompetence. And I think the same can be said about American technology policy towards China. We certainly impose serious costs on China, but when President Trump, I believe in April of 2019, put a ban on higher-end chips to Huawei, most American analysts said that will finish off China's 5G program. They won't be able to roll it out without the higher-end chips. Well, 6 years later, China has 3.8 million 5G base stations, and we have 100,000. And their 5G is real 5G. It's about 3 or 4 times as fast as ours. And that's having a big effect in their industry. They've managed to work around it with lower-end chips. Huawei virtually shut down its handset business because you need the faster chips to run 5G. But then last September, they demonstrated that they could produce domestically with the technology they had higher-end chips that were good enough to run a 5G smartphone, and they could kick the stuffing out of Apple in the Chinese market. So we have not really stopped the Chinese from proceeding with their plan. We've imposed substantial costs on them. My guess is maybe even 0.5% of GDP per year. It's a big cost, but they're willing to pay it. The chief technology officer of Huawei told me in an interview a year ago, you don't understand the Chinese. The guy's an Australian. That if we have a problem, we'll put 1,000 engineers on it. And if that doesn't do it, we'll put 10,000 engineers on it. And China graduates more engineers than the whole rest of the world combined. So they've got a lot of them. So whenever you put a specific problem in front of the Chinese, they'll attack it, and most of the time they'll solve it. Where we really shine, and the Chinese don't, is in the unknown unknowns, in innovation. It's the kind of maverick, eccentric, antinomian, problem with authority rebel that did most of the great innovations of the digital age in the United States. So I'm convinced that if we pick our spots and we put the resources behind innovation the way we used to during the Cold War, we'll leapfrog China in many areas. But it won't work to try to stay ahead of them or suppress them in every area. It's a matter of picking our spots and being excellent in really key areas. It's fine to say trade destroyed a lot of American jobs. There's no question about it. But to what extent is that process easily reversible? We've got 600,000 manufacturing jobs advertised right now, and about the same amount of construction jobs, skilled jobs. We can't fill them. We've got schools that don't teach kids basic math. My dad got his first job at the Brooklyn Navy Yard in 1941. He worked on the Marblehead after it got chewed up in the Leyte Gulf. And he got a good education in math at Brooklyn public schools. And he was qualified to start as a machinist apprentice. If you look at what you need to start as a machinist apprentice now, well, it's proficient trigonometry, for example, coordinate geometry. Fewer than a quarter of American high school kids are proficient in high school math. So a kid with good high school math can walk out of high school and get a $50,000 a year job right now. They're there, but we're not training these kids because we've destroyed our educational system. We are so dependent on imports, particularly for capital goods, that we're like a junkie who's so weakened that if you put him on cold turkey, you kill him. I'm not talking about just the cranes at ports. Virtually every switch, capacitor, piece of electrical equipment that goes into utilities comes from China right now. We just stopped making them. Do you want to hand out subsidies for people to make capacitors? right now. So there's just situations where, fine, we accept the goods from China, and other places where we kick them out. I'm all for tariffs on autos, particularly EVs. Donald Trump's exactly right. It would be a bloodbath if we let the Chinese manufacturers dump stuff on us. But I also agree with Trump that allowing Chinese automakers to build plants in the United States and employ American workers is a good idea. So, unfortunately, the devil's in the details, and you have to, as I said, start with what's best for us, what's best for our people, and there are compromises. You can't get rid of China altogether. It's just too big. That problem's metastasized. But you can do a great deal to reduce our dependency and to leapfrog them. And it'll take time and a lot of effort in a lot of different areas.